The Grim Reapers have come for the Mexican cartels. They've been ordered by the CIA, but before you think the agency has some otherworldly connections, know that these are not the Reapers that may have come first to your mind. These Reapers are the MQ-9 Reaper, unmanned aerial drones being used for surveillance against cartel activity in the country. They've bolstered CIA operations in Mexico. At least that's what the reports from both the ground and CNN suggest. The Reapers are a part of the increased efforts of the US administration under President Donald Trump to curb cartel activity. For now, the MQ-9 flights seem to be the only drone to conduct surveillance rather than perform long-range strikes common for these drones. But what's the reason for the increased US activity in the area? How has the US military, using its equipment in, or rather over Mexican soil, affected the US Mexico relations? And what are the possible future avenues of this secretive warfare? Stick around to find out on today's episode of The Military Show. Let's start with what we know about the missions concerning the MQ-9 drones. The first reports came from CNN on February 18, which implied that the CIA had been deploying unarmed Reaper drones deep into Mexican territory to gather data on cartel operations and activities, particularly in regard to human and drug trafficking. There are two large keywords here: had been and unarmed. The CNN report goes so far as to mention that the CIA was conducting these covert missions even during the previous administration of former President Joe Biden. However, the report acknowledges that the Trump administration's timing has significantly escalated the rate and complexity of the missions involved. This represents a large shift in the US administration's stance toward Mexico and its cartels, which goes in line with Trump's designation of 8 Latin American cartels, 6 of which are from Mexico, as foreign terrorist organizations or FTOs. At the same time, the FTO declaration came only a few days after Mexico's government approved the US sending its Army's 7th Special Forces Group to conduct joint training with Mexico's elite Naval Marine Corps. This demonstrates that the relationship between the US and Mexico, at least in terms of leveraging their national armies for the task of helping to dispatch cartels from the countries, seems to be mutually beneficial, with the US providing military support and Mexico providing the legal framework for the US Army to operate with. This brings us to the second important keyword of the recent Reaper drone report: unarmed. To give you an idea why the fact that these drones are unmanned matters, let's go over why exactly the Reaper is so potentially feared. The MQ-9 Reaper, introduced into service in 2007, is an advanced, remotely piloted aircraft developed by General Atomics for the US Air Force and the CIA. It's known primarily for its long endurance, high-altitude surveillance capabilities and flexibility to be deployed in various military and intelligence-gathering operations. In its armed configuration, the MQ-9 Reaper typically carries Hellfire missiles or laser-guided bombs, enabling it to conduct precision strikes against specific targets. Its ability to linger over an area for extended periods while armed makes it highly effective for real-time tactical strikes, providing the ability to swiftly neutralize threats as they emerge and are noticed by US intelligence. Notably, armed Reapers have played significant roles in operations against terrorist organizations such as ISIS in Syria and Iraq, as well as targeted strikes against Al-Qaeda and Taliban leadership in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Conversely, the unarmed variant of the MQ-9 focuses exclusively on intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance ISR missions. Rather than weaponry, this version of the Reaper drone carries sophisticated cameras, radar, sensors, and other surveillance equipment that allow for detailed monitoring and intelligence collection. Why does that matter, you might ask? Well, while the Mexican government has agreed to host a single US Special Forces unit for cooperative training, reports initially suggested that the US was conducting drone surveillance missions in Mexico without full governmental oversight, raising concerns over sovereignty and transparency. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum and other officials had previously voiced unease about Mexico's territorial integrity, especially given that the drones were allegedly operating without direct supervision or even knowledge of local authorities at times. However, Sheinbaum later clarified that the surveillance drone flights are not rogue operations, but part of a long-standing bilateral agreement. There is nothing illegal, and it's part of a collaboration and coordination, she said during a press briefing. She emphasized that these flights are part of the coordination, collaborations that have been going on for many years between the United States government and the Mexican government, and added that such missions occur at Mexico's request. Still, Scheinbaum noticed the importance of data transparency, stating, "The important thing here is that they share information with the government of Mexico. Whether the US is doing so consistently or to Mexico's satisfaction remains unclear. But the Reaper drones aren't even the only military equipment the CIA is supposedly using to conduct these missions. Enter the Lockheed U-2 spy plane. Nicknamed the Dragon Lady, the U-2 is an iconic reconnaissance aircraft that's been serving the US Air Force and CIA since the mid-1950s. Famous for its distinctively long wingspan and ability to fly incredibly high altitudes, upwards of 70,000 feet, it easily operates beyond the reach of most anti-aircraft systems, making it ideal for surveillance missions over hostile or contested territories. In this case, the territory is less hostile, but there might be a few reasons why the CIA has opted for using the more advanced U-2s over the Reaper drones for some of its missions. One of the most impressive aspects of the U-2 is its advanced imaging technology. Equipped with ultra-high resolution cameras, radar systems, and an array of sensitive sensors, the U-2 can produce detailed imagery with remarkable clarity, even from over 13 miles high. To put this into perspective, on each image, you could clearly distinguish objects as small as individual vehicles or even identify specific types of military equipment on the ground, giving analysts an extraordinary level of detail to work with. Besides traditional photographic imagery, the U-2 also utilizes synthetic aperture radar, or SAR, that can pierce through clouds and darkness, creating clear, detailed images regardless of weather conditions or time of day. Its advanced electronic intelligence, aka ELINT, equipment can detect and analyze electronic signals, radar emissions, and communication transmissions from vast distances, providing crucial insights about enemy installations and capabilities. Despite its age, the plane has been repeatedly upgraded, adapting to contemporary surveillance requirements, and remains in active service precisely because of its unparalleled ability to gather precise, actionable intelligence. The same report that suggested Reapers are flying over Mexico also included a few throwaway lines about spy aircraft. A different CNN report from February 10 showcased that the U-2s and other spy plane variants have had a rapidly increasing mission frequency near Mexican airspace, with as many as 18 flights over the course of only 10 days. Previously, the CIA's surveillance was limited to roughly one flight of a U-2 per month, which points to a significantly increased interest by the US administration in Mexican cartels and their criminal potential, especially in the U.S. Mexico border and the associated narcotics trade. While most of the missions were actually conducted over US soil, namely Texas, Arizona, and California, data collated from open-source trackers of military hardware indicate a single long-haul flight looping around the Baja Peninsula and passing near the Sinaloa region of Mexico. To illustrate the importance of this last mission, Sinaloa is the home turf of the deadly and infamous Sinaloa cartel, arguably one of the world's largest criminal organizations. The report suggested that the plane used for this flight wasn't actually a U-2, but the Air Force RC-135 Rivet, which specializes in picking up communication signals from the ground, such as phone and internet correspondence over mobile networks. So, the US intelligence services have the trifecta of vital information on cartel movements. The U-2 imagery can show exactly where the cartels have amassed their organizations near the US Mexico border. The Rivet can pick up comms to provide an early warning signal on vital operations or proceedings directly from the cartel leadership. And the Reaper drones serve to round out the information with a more detailed and to-the-ground approach than the planes themselves. More specifically, the Reaper cameras have been adapted to use multispectral imaging, which detects chemical plumes or leftovers from specific reactions. These plumes can include the ordinarily invisible fumes from manufacturing fentanyl and other drugs in labs. But what does the US administration, or perhaps more precisely Trump, want with all this information? As it turns out, the same report that announced the long-term presence of US reconnaissance aircraft surrounding Mexico also suggested that the US had been planning this move for quite a while, well before Trump's inauguration in January. A 30-page Trump transition planning document titled simply 2025 Agency Action Plan outlined the Trump administration's early priorities for the intelligence community to reprogram counter-terrorism resources. However, we can go even further. to suggest that Trump put these actions in motion during his first presidency. Trump stated in 2019 that he was ready to wage war on the cartels and that some of the Mexican cartels earned so much from their activities both inside and outside of Mexico that they could field their own armies. This view was further cemented by Mexico's previous president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, and his departure from the kingpin strategy utilized by the US and Mexico administrations from 2007 to 2018. Instead, during his 6-year term, Obrador focused on trying to deal with the socio-economic factors that allow the cartels to thrive as a viable source of income for young people, regardless of the potential prices and risks they'd have to endure in the process. The initiative was ultimately considered a failure, at least during Obrador's term in office. This stemmed from the initiative's ineffectiveness in combating the actual source, or perhaps more importantly, correctly judging the scale of the problem at hand. Cartels managed to actually thrive under Obrador's policies, leading some to believe that the Mexican government was actively working with rather than against the cartels, as evident by rampant corruption throughout the country. Trump's announcements during his first presidential term and the 2024 elections only fanned the flames of discord between the two country administrations. The remade Mexican government under Sheinbaum took Obrador's approach a step further by reinforcing the country's judicial system and enhancing military and intelligence operations. With the Mexican administration now taking a more direct approach to curbing cartel violence, influence, and operational scope both within and beyond its borders, some officials have expressed concern over how the US is pursuing similar goals on Mexican soil. While President Sheinbaum has characterized recent US drone flights as part of a long-standing and collaborative security arrangement, other voices in her administration have been more guarded. Mexican Defense Minister Ricardo Trevilla, for instance, stated that Mexico cannot rule out espionage because we do not know exactly what was done. The relations between Mexico and the US were further worsened by Trump issuing tariffs on Mexico as well as Canada and China. The first announcement in early February was 25% tariffs on all products from Mexico. The Mexican government countered with an announcement of tariffs of their own, but a meeting a day after the announcement led to Mexico pledging to deploy 10,000 troops to the border to curb cartel influence in return for delaying the tariffs by at least a month. However, 3 weeks later, Trump stated that Mexico's attempts at peacekeeping were seemingly not good enough and imposed the tariffs anyway. Following that, further negotiations of tariffs were cancelled or postponed, but Trump introduced a new tariff of up to 25% on automotive imports into the US in late March. Curiously, a large portion of the American car industry is based in Mexican industrial manufacturing facilities. Furthermore, with the tariffs in place, it's likely that car manufacturers will just pass the cost increase directly to the buyer, even if they do so in a smaller ratio to maintain the air of competitiveness. At the same time, several models of Tesla, from the electric car company owned by Elon Musk, who is now directly and irrevocably linked to the Trump administration, have been least impacted by the tariffs. So, with the US Mexico relations approaching their boiling point, what do Trump and the CIA plan to do in regard to the cartels in Mexico? The first step in this process will arguably be to foster deeper cooperative bonds between the countries. This has been challenged not only by Trump waging what is essentially a trade war against Mexico, but also by the Mexican government not fully able to shed the impression of working with the cartels themselves. This is underscored by two recent high-profile criminal cases brought by the US Department of Justice against top former Mexican officials. Back in 2020, former Defense Minister General Salvador Cienfuegos Cepeda faced charges for allegedly leveraging his powerful position to help the H2 cartel with drug trafficking operations. Then in 2024, former Secretary of Public Security Genaro Garcia Luna was handed a hefty 38-year prison sentence for accepting bribes from the Sinaloa cartel in exchange for aiding their illegal activities. Adding to this troubling pattern, a US Drug Enforcement Administration (DEA) report revealed evidence suggesting that Mexican cartels had secretly funneled millions of dollars into Obrador's 2006 presidential campaign. The military relationship between the US and Mexico brings its own challenges, especially in the context of recent developments. During his presidency, Obrador notably increased both the budget and authority of Mexico's Secretariat of National Defense, or SEDENA. His intention was to expand the military's role beyond traditional defense activities, allowing it to undertake civilian responsibilities, including law enforcement duties and major infrastructure projects. However, this shift coincided with a notable gap in formal cooperation between the US and Mexico. Shortly after taking office, Mexico withdrew from the Merida Initiative, a long-standing U.S. Mexico counter-narcotics agreement. From 2019 to 2021, the two countries lacked an official framework to jointly combat cartel operations. During this period, cartels took advantage of the vacuum, expanding their territorial influence and significantly contributing to the surge of fentanyl-related overdose deaths in the United States. Further complicating matters, the Mexican military's increasing involvement in civilian sectors and private businesses, combined with troubling allegations of corruption and collusion with cartels, especially involving leaks of sensitive intelligence, raises questions about the integrity and reliability of Sedena as a key partner. Yet, despite these concerns, the US is practically forced to see Sedena as a crucial ally due to its central role in Mexico's national security framework. And there is only one other option, the much smaller Secretariat of the Navy, or SEMAR. However, SEMAR has actually built a strong record of assisting the US military and the DEA in joint operations. Similarly, Sheinbaum's approach to combating the cartels more directly could mean that the Mexican military might get the training and the positive reputation it needs to work with the somewhat volatile US government. So which cartels might be on the top of the CIA's hit list? Among several prominent groups, the Sinaloa cartel, reportedly one of the two cartels responsible for most of the drug trafficking into the US, is perhaps the definitive contender. Widely recognized as the most powerful drug trafficking organization in the Western Hemisphere, the Sinaloa cartel's activities extend far beyond narcotics and human smuggling. They become deeply involved in illegal activities like extortion of legitimate businesses, unauthorized mining operations, oil theft, and infiltrating legal enterprises to launder their substantial profits. What makes the Sinaloa cartel particularly concerning, however, are its close connections with China, especially regarding fentanyl production and distribution. The cartel reportedly sources precursor chemicals from Chinese suppliers and utilizes sophisticated Chinese money laundering networks to move and conceal their illicit revenues. This dangerous collaboration has drawn considerable attention from US authorities, resulting in the cartel becoming a primary focus of congressional investigations and intense law enforcement efforts. A clear demonstration of this was the Biden administration's notable arrest in 2024 of Ismael El Mayo Zambada, co-founder and senior leader of the organization. This is further supported by Trump's issuing a tariff on China as part of its attempt to curb cartel influence within the US and on its borders. At the same time, the Los Zetas cartel might once have posed a major threat, but today they're a shadow of their former selves. Originally formed by defectors from Mexico's elite Grupo Aeromóvil de Fuerzas Especiales, GAFE, the group once used military training and intelligence awareness to outmaneuver rivals and authorities alike. Their proprietary radio networks and brutal tactics made them a dominant force in the early 2000s. But years of infighting, leadership losses, and government crackdowns have fractured the group into smaller, localized factions. While remnants still exist in parts of Mexico, Los Zetas no longer have the national reach or cohesion to drive a unified strategy, much less coordinate resistance across multiple cartels. That said, reports on social media suggest some cartels may be interpreting increased US activity as a signal to go underground or quietly pool resources. And while it's unlikely that Los Zetas are leading that effort, their old infrastructure may still be leveraged by others for limited coordination, but even that would be a far cry from their heyday. Still, the evolving cartel landscape, fragmented but highly adaptive, means US operations could face stiff resistance, especially from more dominant groups like CJNG or the Sinaloa cartel. But the Reaper drones aren't even the only military equipment the CIA is supposedly using to conduct these missions. And with that in mind, what could the US even do? The Trump's administration's recent allocation of significant resources from the Department of Defense and the CIA indicates a shift toward a more aggressive stance. The covert missions and intelligence gathering operations could lead to invoking direct military action against the cartels. Such a move would require formal authorization by the US government. One pathway to formal authorization the administration could pursue is a formal authorization for use of military force, called AUMF, approved by Congress, allowing open and sustained deployment of military forces under Title 10 of the US Code. However, given the political sensitivity around deploying US troops openly on Mexican territory, especially during the current tension between the two countries and previous comments from Mexican officials, the administration may prefer an alternative in CIA-directed covert operations under Title 50. This would involve Trump issuing a presidential finding, authorizing covert CIA actions against cartels, utilizing CIA paramilitary teams or specialized military units under the Joint Special Operations Command (JSOC). Trump historically favored covert operations for similar counter-terrorism missions against Al-Qaeda and ISIS, suggesting a likely preference for this approach. Whichever option is chosen, the initial phase would probably involve significant operations. Trump's designation of Mexican cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, or FTOs, strongly signals this strategy, echoing the precedent set during his previous administration when the Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps (IRGC) Quds Force was designated as an FTO shortly before the targeted killing of its leader, Qasem Soleimani. Specifically, the administration may apply a shock and awe approach similar to Trump's aggressive military campaigns against ISIS. The primary goal would be rapid, decisive operations designed to overwhelm cartel defenses through coordinated raids targeting critical personnel such as sicarios, hitmen, and mid-level commanders responsible for logistics and enforcement. This effort could involve heavy US air support to disrupt cartel counterattacks, preventing regrouping and reduce retaliation. Additionally, US personnel might embed with Mexican naval special forces and drones, such as the armed versions of the aforementioned Reapers that started the entire process, could be used extensively to target key cartel command centers, fentanyl laboratories, and weapon storage facilities. How would the cartels react to these escalations in both violence and reproach from both the US and Mexican administrations? With some media claiming that cartels have already started to wind down their operations and lie low, the success of Trump's campaign might hinge on the CIA successfully locating and targeting vital cartel leadership of the most dangerous or resourceful cartels in Mexico. If Trump fails to cut off the leadership at the head, Mexico might get a repeat of the increased violence in 2024 that was the result of the DEA arresting two prominent Sinaloa leaders without creating pressure on the rest of the cartel. While it's still uncertain if the US will carry out direct military operations against the cartels, one thing is clear: the Trump administration's intensified efforts against drug smuggling and human trafficking aren't merely short-term political maneuvers. Instead, these actions signal a substantial shift in American grand strategy, from maintaining the expansive global dominance established after World War II toward a narrower, more pragmatic focus on defending immediate national interests, particularly at the country's southern border. This same focus on strengthening American interests could be seen in Trump's approach to the war in Ukraine, which has been drastically different from the Biden administration's. But what do you think? What's next in store in the war between Trump and Mexican cartels? Leave your comments below, and thanks for watching. Now go check out You Won't Believe How the CIA is Helping Ukraine Win the War, or click this other video instead.